medicine is relationship in so many different ways. Whether it's the food we eat, whether it's the things we're doing that are good medicine, the people that we surround ourselves with, that give us and share in our energy, the land, the earth, Mother Earth, Father Sky, and IFS, I believe, is very good medicine.
Hey everyone, I'm Tammy Sollenberger, the author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about who they are, the different parts of themselves, and for those who want to connect with their true self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Okay, so we're just going to start. We're jumping in. I am with Suzan McVicker today, and we're going to be joined by Patton here in a second. And I was just sharing with Suzan an experience I had at my house this morning where there was a deer. My dog ran across the street, and there was a deer that was hurt, I believe, and was crying. And I got really close to the deer. I saw the deer. I heard it crying. And then called the local police, and they came, and I believe, because I haven't checked yet, but I believe they shot the deer. I heard the shots actually, and I had to go jump into session. And so Suzan and I are just sitting. This is the first time I've had a second to just like land and think about what happened. And so you were just sharing with me about deer medicine. And so we decided, let's hit record and get this officially on record.
Well, this is part of what Pete and I and other Indigenous or Indigenous descendants are doing, and of course doing it with IFS, but is making it safer to have these kinds of conversations outside of Indigenous circles, where it's just understood that you just had an encounter with a deer. You're in the trance with deer medicine. And so this is one of the things that we just want to feel freer to be able to be with and talk about ourselves and to share with other people, so that you can, if it's a new experience, and maybe it isn't, that you work with medicines all the time. I don't know you that well, Tammy. We know each other from the inside out. But anyway, so that there can be more of that comparing notes and languaging what happened in an encounter like that with an Indigenous lens.
Well, what I just noticed over the past couple of hours was parts that were like, I just have to push this away. I have to not think about it. And I need to just pretend it didn't. I even have a part, just pretend that didn't happen. Like try not to, I keep picturing the deer. Just stop picturing the deer, pretend it doesn't happen. Like, let's focus on what else we're doing today. So that's what I'm noticing.
Well, I'm glad you noticed those parts, because that's exactly what you probably, well, I was too. I was acculturated to do just that, to push that relationship into something else when it is obviously just presented here for you. You told me that you ran out, you heard something, or it bothered your dog. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And your dog led you to this deer that was in a highly unusual for humans to witness position. It was sitting like a dog or a cat. And it was, you could hear it. And to hear a deer in the wild, say anything is a gift. It's an unusual experience. And just because there is death or suffering doesn't mean that it isn't a special gift to you. In a lot of Indigenous ways of seeing the world, death is part of the cycle of life. And the synchronicity, the coincidence there, quote, of seeing that deer, being drawn to that deer in compassion, just seems that it was there for you and your dog, because your day was just booked, structured, and there it was at a time that you could run out and be with it. and look into the eyes of that creature and see its beautiful ears and hear its voice. You definitely were in the energy, the medicine of that being.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about, and I just want to say, I so appreciate this conversation. I don't know that I would have I feel like I'm like leaning in and letting myself, well, you're inviting me to lean in and really appreciate the beauty of this experience. And so I really
Yes,
appreciate that.
yes.
Tell me about what this means, dear medicine. I've never heard that term. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me what that means.
Medicine is sometimes another word for energy. I mean, different people are going to, perceive it, one of those P's of self there, have different perceptions of it, different understandings, different beliefs about it. The way I understand medicine is that it's energy, and we're all energy beings, and we're energy beings who share energy, interrelate with each other. And that includes every being in nature. And that is a beautiful window into Indigenous worldview. And energy is a whole continuum of ways that we can feel it, use our neuroception terms with it, and take it in. So that's just an overview of medicine. And here's Pete. I'd love to hear what he has to say about his understandings, because he comes from, I'm a descendant from a southeastern Turtle Island tribe. And there's so much similarity, so many universal experiences with Indigenous people, but yet so many unique distinctions between tribal groups too. And Pete, I'll let you say this for yourself, but I know you to be from a far northwestern tribal community.
Well, I mean, I'm Inuit. I was stolen adopted here in Oregon, so I don't really have any identity with a tribe or a village, which each tribe up there in Alaska is a village in itself, or it is a tribe within itself. So I don't have the connections. Kind of building them here. That's kind of what I'm building this community of faith about, and kind of building where I'm rooted, where spirits led me. So I don't have a whole lot about the Inuit because I've been stripped of that.
Well, yes, and we'll get back to that because that's a big part of this book chapter that we gathered around here this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like Spirit has led us in a direction this morning here, because Tammy had a close encounter, an intimate experience with a deer.
Ooh.
Yes, and started when we were just greeting each other and, how are you? That's what Tammy is with right now. And so we were talking about medicine, and I gave my understanding of medicine, what medicine is energy, and just was real curious about your understanding of medicine from your tribal perspective or your intertribal perspective.
Well, medicine is relationship in so many different ways. Whether it's the food we eat, whether it's the things we're doing that are good medicine, the people that we surround ourselves with, that give us and share in our energy. That's the land, the earth, Mother Earth, Father Sky. That's it's all about. I mean, it's a much broader, and IFS, I believe, is very good medicine. So, having worked in it for 30 years now.
Well, Pete, it's nice to meet you. It's nice to see you, and thank you for just jumping in. And Pete, this is an audio podcast, so people can't see what just happened. But when Suzan was describing what happened with the deer, Pete put his hand on his heart and just looked up to me, and I have a part that's like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. I just so appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's good medicine.
I love it.
It's
Yeah, it
heart to
feels like,
heart medicine.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, we understand that in IFS. That's what we're about, is being heart to heart.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, you wrote this chapter in the Altogether Us book with two other people, which we're going to be interviewing them in a couple weeks, I think. But we wanted to split this up and talk, and I know we have so much to cover, but I just have to say it feels good just to have taken a different direction and to be slower and to be with what's here. That feels just really good. My body feels a little bit slower, and I feel more connected to the two of you. So I just want to name that.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
That is really important to us, because slowing down and being with who we are and with each other is really it's the Indigenous worldview coming back into IFS.
When it felt like, to me, you did something that I think is very hard to do, is I felt that as I read your chapter. It was like reading the way you wrote your chapter felt like the words you used, the flow of the words. I felt like that's very different than my chapter or the other chapters that were probably a little bit more heady or something. There's something very experiential about the way you wrote your chapter. And I remember thinking, I don't know how they did this, but this is pretty amazing. Why don't we start, if it feels okay, about your chapter and about sort of, I think what I would like to do, and we can sort of just see how this flows, but I'd like to talk about, so it seems like your chapter is really broken up into, the first part is really about story. And Pete, we talked about talking about story. And the second part is talking about the 7 B's. Why don't we start there, if that feels okay, Pete, with about why the stories were why they're important, why they're included, and why they're important. You said this, which is really beautiful. Each individual experience is a community experience, and each community experience is full of individual experiences. And each individual experience has a universe of parts within their separately detailed ways of carrying those individual and community experiences. It's a lot of words, but I thought, wow, you just expressed a lot right there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're 4 authors coming together, and just to give credit to Julia and Susan doing the bulk of the editorial work, and that voice that's there is very much a result of their work, and they're wrestling with the editors, and making what came about as being a priority. So I just want to give credit to that. But to many of the stories, are individual stories. Several of them are mine. But I really, really want to emphasize that, it's about all 4 of us, and it's about us wanting to communicate as a community, to step back and help people understand that, I mean, I was reminded the other day by a brother who's a published poet, Cliff Taylor, who was talking at a reading about his experience of reading Burying My Heart at Wounded Knee, and is not being able to read it through the first time. And I was reminded that I wasn't able to read it through completely the first time. I was only able to read a few chapters, and then eventually, I think maybe I've made it all the way through. I forget. But that, being tied to those people as we are as a Native American community, even though we're of maybe, perhaps we're of different tribes. It's a very similar experience that we've gone
Yes.
through.
So
And
what
so,
happens with story, right? So you're like,
mhm,
there's the story, and I couldn't get through it. And so there's
mhm,
something about the power of story.
mhm,
I think that's what I'm getting. There's something about the power of story
yeah,
that does something different than like when I just read, here's the material. Like that is
mhm,
a different, I'm having a different relationship with it. Like I have a
mhm,
different relationship with story than I do with heady material, maybe.
yeah, yeah. So, so I mean, my identifying as stolen and adopted, I mean, that fits, a couple of the stories. The adoption, into a white family, into whites only Oregon, even though it didn't go into the specifics of where that was because of the universal, the feel of the universality of that story. But you know, and then the car accident was my story. My that that story communicates a whole bunch of different things. Um, Talking from the perspective of the train driver, seeing my mother drive focused towards the railroad crossing indicates something going on in that car that wasn't all right. It was, very, very intense. And so I can say that, and my eyes will get watery when I talk about that, but I want that story to be a universal story of that's that's being indigenous. Something was going on in there that wasn't the right thing. It was very horrible and terrible. Um, you know, I could throw in my interpretations of what was going on in that car, but I think it would distract from what we're really talking about here.
Yeah. And so people that are listening to this, they may have not have the book, they might not have read the chapter. So they might not know what exactly you're talking about, which is okay. They can go buy the
Hmm.
book. They can go read the chapter. But you said something that I think that I really would love to talk about a little bit more is you said that's being indigenous. Can you tell me what that means?
Well, I can talk from my experience. Um, Being adopted into what had been whites only Oregon until about 36 years before I was born. What we know about that type of choice of a culture is that it takes far longer than that, and it still struggles with that today. I'm, fully planted here in the land of the Clatsop-Nehalem tribe in Astoria, Oregon, and I feel it every single freaking day that I exist here. Is that this land belonged, and it doesn't belong to those people who inhabit it now. And there are still Clatsop-Nehalem people, but they don't live around here. Even though this land belongs to them. You know, and we're reminded of it on a regular basis, getting emails and Facebook messages from the Chinook tribe, which is just across the river, which didn't allow Lewis and Clark onto their land, and they came to the south part of the river, or the south side of the river, as a result of being pushed off. And the Chinook is unceded territory, and was recognized in 2000, and then that recognition was stolen again, in 2001, and they're not recognized federally at this point. So the whole area is full of struggle, and that's really what I want to join in with in whatever Native community I become part of or am part of.
And Suzan, what happens for you as you hear Pete share his story?
Well, I love Oregon. I lived there for 3 years in the mountains and in the Willamette Valley. And when I first lived up in the mountains, and learned about the Umpqua National Forest, the Umpqua River, I started asking all my neighbors, well, where are the Umpqua? Because I was seeing this on the cartons of milk, the Umpqua Dairy, the Umpqua Theater, the
ice cream,
Umpqua ice cream, all of this stuff. So, and this was before I even knew that I am a Cherokee descendant. But this was really in my heart. So I just asked and asked and asked. And everyone told me the Umpqua are no more. The Umpqua National Forest is named for them, but they are no more. So after a while, I just took that for face value. And this is just those memories. And then it wasn't until a couple of decades later that I read, maybe in Indian Country Today or someplace, that the Umpqua had come out of hiding and begun to get state, if not federal, recognition. You can look this up. It's out there. Now, I don't remember all of the details, but what really impressed me was that in order to protect themselves, those who carried the traditions, it had to just disappear in the white or dominant memory, because it was too dangerous to be out there. And then the comeback to me was, my heart just opened so wide about that. And so that's what your story of other Oregon tribes reminds me of, Pete. Beautiful. And that's part of the 7 Bs, the right to be, belong, and become, which was stripped away. And that's why we made it, the Indigenous IFS Council made it a part. I mean, we decided to do 7 Bs because there were the 5 Ps of self, the 6 Fs of self, and the 8 Cs of self, which left this beautiful slot of 7 to come up with 7 something or other as a mnemonic. And so that it was the right to be, belong, and become was important enough to all of us that we included it.
Yeah. And I wonder if, go ahead, Pete.
Well, I was just thinking, I think I remember when the 8 Cs were developing, they were 7 Cs for a little bit. And then there was an 8 C that came in, and all of a sudden it was the 8 Cs of self. That was, back in the late 90s, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure I remember that right.
That's so interesting. And you say in the book that 7 is sacred. It's a sacred number. So it's so important to have. And you have this beautiful graphic, this star that's in the book that I just think is just beautiful, with the bees all around it. And then symbols inside. So it's in a circle, and then there's 7 pointed star, and then there's symbols in the star. Is there anything you want to say about those symbols?
I would echo also that they're beautiful. And and that when I first saw them, Julia, well, we had a different kind of like a quilt of 7 stars. At first, we started out just with a line drawing of 7-pointed star. And then Julia had a graphic designer create the one that you see in the book. And to me, it has diverse symbols that are recognizable as some probably original symbols of many peoples. Time of year, the rains start, you can hear the water rushing in places where it was dry in the summer, and love it.
Yeah.
In fact, that dream that was one of my contributions to the chapter, the dream about being a sequoia tree. And that clear dream that it's been with me now for, I used to say 40 years, but I don't know how many years. And that came from, living out there with those sequoia trees. And like I said, homesteading in the mountains and being in those high mountain meadows. So, yeah.
I mean, that thank you for giving that contribution. I remember when I was like in junior high, growing up in Eugene, having a similar, I don't know if it was a dream. I remember I wrote about kind of being a tree, and that whole, a similar kind of narrative experience that came to me, and I was like really inspired by it as a really young boy. So yeah.
I didn't know that, and yet that's what got inserted into this composite narrative or
Yeah.
composite story. And that's what's so beautiful about composite stories, is that they just loop us all in mysterious ways sometimes. And that they, by telling this story from the perspective of several of us and many parts over a course of time, we really strengthen ourselves. Being able to tell a meta story or together like that helps us understand about universal experience and how it touches the individual. I love, the way you articulated that too. The back and forth that we all are between individual and community experience and spiritual experience,
and the weaving together of all of us.
Right. So
Yes.
Fascinating that I didn't even know that until this moment, that you actually had a dream about being a tree, but it was my contribution to the composite story.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Pete, how do you feel like you can take a few minutes to tell us about the Great Spirit Gathering?
It's a developing community of faith. I mean, we're getting together actually tonight, this evening for a board meeting. We've got together our 501c3 paperwork, our constitution and bylaws, with the help of several allies of mine, personal allies who've come alongside me, and I've shared with them wanting to develop this well before I really kind of became knowledgeable of other Indigenous people in the area. Spirit really kind of guided me over the last several years, starting in 2021, to begin to think about how can I assist Indigenous people to express their spirituality in a both a formalized and non-formalized manner.
And Pete is doing this thing with his hands as almost a gathering. You're sort of using your hands and towards yourself. Yeah. So tell me about this sort of this gathering up of people with similar views or similar connection.
Well, one of the as a healer myself, I was, I've had several experiences with I mean, we're here in Oregon where psilocybin's been legalized. I'm a therapist with close to, not quite, but very close to 30 years of experience in the IFS model. And so when Measure 109 was passed in 2020, 3 days after that, the medical director of my agency, the agency I currently work for and have worked for the last 6 years, sent me an email and said, "You're going to be the head of the psilocybin clinic." But with all the development at the state level, it's really become very clear that it's going to take a lot of money for each individual to access those services. I think the going rate right now that I've read about is $3,000 to $4,000 for one journey on psilocybin. And so my vision includes not just the expression of Native American spirituality, but I want to work within the community to make it accessible to have access to those medicines. So that's one of the reasons that for me building and Great Spirit Gathering. Another has become that there are Native people that have moved to and exist in, whether they're from across the river and as part of the Chinook tribe, or whether they're from Ponca, the Ponca tribe in Nebraska, or whether they're from the Ho-Chunk tribe in Minnesota, or several others that I am still connecting with, that I don't know how to rattle off their tribal affiliations, but wanting to bring them together, also wanting to empower at some level, if that's possible, the Chinook Nehalem tribe to begin to, as Suzan so definitely described, the tribe down in Southern Oregon that I'm totally forgetting the name of at the moment. Rogue River, is it Rogue?
Umpqua.
The Umpqua, yeah, but it's on the Rogue River. The Umpqua folks. So to bring people together to celebrate and stand up. Now that it's been since 1978 that we were given the right by the Supreme Court to celebrate our spirituality as Native people. Want to use that and in a way that makes sense. So, when I started gathering together with my allies, who had, some of them I'd been in relationship for 20 or 30 years, we were just, I was the only Indigenous person on that board. Tonight we will probably be at least one or two people of Indigenous descent who've come alongside, and I've invited in, and we're not really formally saying that we're anything but, hey, here's what we've developed. What do we want to use it for? This is what I want to use it for. I want to use it to deliver medicine to the community in a way that is affordable and accessible. But how else can we use a community of faith as a group of people of Indigenous descent?
Yeah. And I'm thinking that the bees come in here so strongly, because there's just being able to name that I'm a part of this tribe, or this tribe exists, or this is a group of people, or can we gather together? Is it safe to gather together? Is it safe to be, become, belong? And it's amazing when you're like 1978. I'm like, you mean like 18? Like what? Like that just happened? Like it's just so it's just as you're telling me the story, I'm really hearing how important these bees are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Suzan, do you want to talk about, I know you just wrote this amazing article. So you wrote the chapter in the book, and then you wrote this beautiful article in the, let's see, I have it right here.
It's a long title of the International Journal.
Yeah, the International Journal of Communal and Transgenerational Trauma. That's the name of the journal.
Correct.
And then the name of the article is Worldview Informed Healing, the 7 B's of Indigenous Inspired IFS. And so we emailed just a little bit back and forth about how, you didn't say you were thinking of the 7 B's differently, but you said kind of how you're noticing them or using them. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the 7 B's and what's happening for you in your relationship with them.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. I trust those 7 B's because I was right there, and we developed them together with people that I know, and people, that we've become friends. And so they are important guidelines in understanding how the Indigenous ways live inside of me and how I might live into them. Because, like I said, when I was growing up, even in 1978, right at the end of the time that I was in Oregon, I didn't know I had Native bloodlines and a spirit memory. That's what, the spirit memory coming back is an amazing blessing of the 7 Bs. So I think, those 7 Bs are only a couple years old, and relating them to my own life is a process. I've gotten deeper into the study of Native language, my own heritage language, the Cherokee language. And so that's the beginning, that story of how that happened, and the spirit memory all came back to me. And I felt the connection with my ancestors when I first went down to the homeland of the Eastern Band of Cherokees and saw that language, the Cherokee syllabary, on street signs and storefronts, and how that inspired in me and led to this study of the language, which is just a deeper embodiment. We talk about embodied learning with the 7 Bs. So that's one way that it's really come out for me, and the 7 Bs in my life. And then just the publication of this article. I have a community of new friends because I've stepped up my learning with another teacher. And we have this group that studies together. And one of my new friends in that study community said, "Oh, I really like mnemonics." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's kind of an unusual word to hear." So the article came out right at that time, so I shared it with her. She is from the Cherokee Nation. This is composite story developing right here. And she was with her mother right at the time of the pandemic. And her mother said, "Well, let's get your sons enrolled with let's go to Tahlequah, the capital of the Cherokee Nation, make sure that paperwork's all in order for them." And they did that. And this is of special importance to her because her mother passed a couple months after this, that they were stopped at a stop sign in Tahlequah. And, just like for the Eastern Band of Cherokees in Cherokee, North Carolina, Tahlequah, Oklahoma has the street signs with the Cherokee syllabary right there. So she took a photo of it. She and I were able to compare photos of the signs that we saw. And she just felt that medicine, we might say, that energy, and of her ancestors, and told her mother, "I want to learn the language." And her mother said, "Then you should do that." So, here we are with telling, experiencing with each other. And so that's just a way. There are lots of ways I could say about the 7 Bs informing my life as I look at them and live with them since the time that's what this paper is about, really, more of the details of the story of how we develop them.
And I'm wondering if, to tie it back to what we talked about at the beginning of this and the idea of medicine, I'm wondering if noticing the 7 Bs, which I'm going to have you say them because people might have not heard the other podcast, and so I want you to say them, but noticing the 7 Bs or embodying them or being more intentional about them, if that is all medicine, that's all medicine for my system, medicine for my mind, medicine for my heart.
Good job recognizing, Tammy Sullenberger.
Thanks, Pete. I'm going to use this as a new idea to me. So I'm definitely, I'm really taking this in, this idea of medicine, and my experience, and even the idea that deer, that wasn't a coincidence, right? The exact timing, all of that, and all of that is medicine for me for a reason. And yeah, important not to skip over it.
Right. And this is not new to IFS because, and IFS is so Indigenous lifeways and viewpoints informed. But Pete, you probably remember this too, because we did our IFS training at about the same time way back. And there were trainings here in the Chicago area called the Energy of the Self, which we could have just called it the Medicine of the Self. So, yeah. Well, so really this, trying to bring this all together in reflecting before we got together, it is really about the composite story, of the chapter, and like this composite story that I just mentioned. And I have another one, if I could share it, because I'm going on with this person in the study of IFS concepts and the 7Bs. And she just came into my life less than a month ago here in November. And she's Cherokee. This is Caitlin Browning in Oklahoma, who found IFS and wanted to name her fairly new private practice. So metaphor is important to her in her Cherokee culture, and she Googled metaphor and IFS. And she said she was almost shocked when she came up with my dissertation. Now, my dissertation about Cherokee American voices and IFS and how these Cherokee Americans speak and came up with an understanding of IFS and actually articulated it, even though, they're just talking about their Cherokee culture. She said it almost shocked her. And I took the interviews and made them into a composite story. And she said when she read that narrative, that story, that it felt like I was reading me. And this was, that was back in 2017 when that was published. And here it comes. She just wrote to thank me. And so now we're going on together and sharing more about IFS and Cherokee culture.
Beautiful.
So what we're doing here is we just are doing what we used to call consciousness raising or awareness that IFS is Indigenous informed, that we in the IFS community want to be those of us who identify as Indigenous, whether we have bloodlines or lived experience as Indigenous people or not, we want our stories to be witnessed. We want to be seen and heard and have our place in the community. So that's why we've come together with the stories that, are just like the ones that we witness in our inner worlds. So
beautiful.
And I'm wondering, Suzan, if you can talk a little bit, you mentioned a little bit about kind of a downloading of, not knowing you were Cherokee, and then kind of, because it does relate to the composite again.
Exactly.
Because the portal in the chapter was my experience being on the Columbia River and going in deep.
Yeah.
and tell me more about your experience.
Well, thank you, Pete. Yes, we're getting out there the experience of loss, and that is a big common denominator in historical trauma and oppression by colonizers. This is the world around that oppression, and then the internalized oppression, which is burdens that further splinter our communities and cause all sorts of havoc in our inner systems as well as our outer world. That is the composite story. It's about loss and how Indigenous peoples have carried those burdens around that loss and carried the IFS-like indigenous belief systems and practices and ceremonies and unburdening ceremonies, sense of belonging with the land, with nature, with each other. And like Dick Schwartz says, the learning to love ourselves and love each other in responsible relationship, just like IFS. So thank you for reminding me of the commonality there, Pete, with your story of loss and some of the erasures, because that was a cultural erasure that happened to you, but your spirit memory lived through it, just like the cultural erasures of many peoples now that are reconnecting through spirit memory. And IFS, of course, is great at legacy unburdening.
It is. Could go on about that.
We could.
So, we need more time, but we are out of time. So why don't we why don't we end with just naming the 7 Bs for the new listeners? And
do you all have them? Do you both have them in front of you?
I do, yeah.
All right, let's do it in a little different way, because it's like the C's of self. I love it. There's no set order, or the other mnemonics. So I'm going to start with humble, and then let's go counterclockwise this time for the next one. And so there's humble, and Pete.
Right to be, belong, become.
Blessing.
Ceremony as unburdening.
Balance.
Embodied learning.
Belly laugh.
Yes, I just have curious if the listeners can just see what happens for them as they're listening to the Bs, if there's any that they really resonate with, is there any they're drawn to, and just notice that, and just see what happens. And I would invite them to maybe write them down and just see if they can think about them the way they think of the C's, the C's of self-energy, and just see what happens. Just kind of notice what happens. Well, thank you both so much. We did not have enough time, that was for sure, but I just so appreciate you spending time with me. And I appreciate you holding my story and teaching me about medicine.
Thank you, Tammy. We really are all learning together. After all these losses, we each bring something to learn together. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Pete, for all for all the Oregon remembrances, the Oregon medicine.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, like, all the things. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or all the places books are available. You can also visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, where you can download a free meditation on getting to know your should parts. There's parts of you who remind you of what you should be doing. They sound a bit critical at times. Yes, we all have them. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter and the One Inside Facebook page. I'm so grateful for Jack Reardon, who created the new music. Jack is a graduate of Derek Scott's IFS Stepping Stone program. Thanks, Jack, for getting me. And to you, thanks for listening.